understand more what is like the Agrifood Future community, I will leave the floor to Azier, the communication and event specialist at Agrifood, who will welcome you in this event and explain you a little bit more about the Agrifood Future community, how to join it, before to delve in the topic of this morning. So welcome, Azier, and I will leave you the stage.
Thank you, Laria. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining us in this event. I would like, first of all, to thank Nikolaas and Cesare, our two speakers, guest speakers today at the Expert to Expert talks. Laria has said, I'm the communications and event specialist here at EIT CLC South, and I'm also the manager of the Agrifood Expert Community project. And just to give you a quick idea of what it is, the Agrifood Expert Community, it's a group of within the EIT food platform Food Hive, which, Ilaria, if you can share the next slide. It's a community created by EIT to connect and communicate about the agri-food sector, and it has, as other platforms such as Facebook or LinkedIn, it has a main feed where you can share and find all the information about the agri-food sector. And there are also private groups like the Agri-Food Expert community. So this group was created a few years ago, I think in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, on LinkedIn first, and then we started on Food Hive, and the idea is to connect experts, universities and innovation centers, and to generate networking and new project opportunities, and also to have a platform for experts to show their work, and also to try and talk about topics. So having this as a group to expand the professional work of the experts, we have kind of some requirements to be part of it, at least 5 years experience. But I mean, we take a look to the profiles and accept if we find it interesting for the group. And the aim of these events is actually to generate interest and, as I have said, create connections and speak about topics that experts might find, or people that are working in the agri-food community might find interesting. So yeah, welcome again, everyone. We will share now, you will see in the screen a QR code that you can actually scan to get access to the community, and we welcome you to the community. Sorry, and we hope to enjoy this talk. Thank you again.
Thank you, Azier, for your insight into the community. I invite everybody here to scan the QR code if you'd like to be part of this amazing community. We will be happy to welcome you and collaborate all together. So now we will dive into this morning topic. And to do so, I will hand over the floor to Cesare Varallo. He's like food lawyer and partner at LegisLAB and founder of foodlawlotus.com. So he will provide you an overview of practical regulatory challenges that innovate like food companies face when addressing the European market. So welcome, Cesare. I will leave you the stage if you would like to present your slides. Amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Ilaria. If the slides are showing correctly, I'll move on. Yes, thank you. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Yes, I'm a food lawyer, so it's nearly 12 years now that I deal just with food regulatory stuff, and founder of this blog that Ilaria mentioned, where you can find a lot of more free info about our activities. So you can track us on foodlawlotus.com on social media. Today, I will speak to you about the main problems, the goods and bads of a novel food application from a more, let's say, legal perspective. Then Nikolaas will touch on more technical points. So we will try to have an integrated approach here and leave a lot of space to your questions. So the presentation will be around 10 minutes, but if something is missing, don't be afraid to ask in chat or I think directly at the end of our presentation. First problem, to be or not to be a novel food. Very often we start from this big question. We have new ingredients, innovative ingredients that to a certain extent might be similar to something on the market, and we often have no exact idea if a food can be defined novel or not. As you will see in the next slide, the first condition to define a food as novel is the absence of consumption on the European market before 1997. Okay, if there's no proof that the food has been consumed in the European Union before 1997, you have the first situation that can lead you to a novel food classification. Okay, but basically everything is innovative, everything is new, has not been consumed before 1997 in Europe, of course. So it always comes to the production methods, how this food or this ingredient is produced, is modified from an original source. So it's not always straightforward. As you will see, there are foods like, I don't know, new nano-engineered ingredients or cell-cultured meat that surely are novel. Nobody has doubts about that. But other situations are very complex. The definition of novel food is very multifaceted. There are a lot of different paragraphs that define what is a novel food and broad, but does not always reflect the complexity of our real world and the production techniques. This is correct from a legal perspective because the definition has to be open, broad. Otherwise, a regulation will be old in 6 months, or considering how fast innovation is moving. You cannot foresee every possible situation in a legal definition. This would be wrong from a legal technical perspective, but it has to be said that honestly there are definitions that are not easy to identify precisely in this piece of legislation. So the decision about the classification of an ingredient has a lot of implication on your business. In terms of timing, on risks that you are taking, business planning, investments, partnership. Why is that? Because if you market a novel food that is not authorized in Europe, this food, once it's been checked by the authority, noticed by the authority, will be considered at risk. So it will be subject to a food recall. So you cannot be wrong because you can have luck for a while, but if your food at the end of the day will be classified by someone as a novel food and you thought it was not novel food, you will have big troubles, big implications. You have a sales stop, you have a recall. So it's very important to classify correctly since from the beginning your ingredient, because this, imagine if you have an investment fund that is investing in your startup or in your business. They want insurance that at the end of the day, you will market your ingredient, you will produce some revenues, you will have a stable, positioning on the market. They don't want to live in the gray area. I know that very often, especially in areas like food supplements or very innovative ingredients, we have rogue traders that from outside Europe market everything in Europe and don't take into account the novel food, and this is putting a lot of pressure on your business. But you have to classify correctly at the beginning your ingredient, and if necessary, undergo this very complex procedure of the novel food authorization, because otherwise, stay in the gray area, if you, at the end of the day, will be wrong, might be very, very risky for your business, your investors, and everything regarding your activity as a food company. Novel food definition. Novel food is any food that was not used for human consumption to a significant degree in Europe before 15 May 1997. Very clear. And falls under at least one of the following categories. Food with a new or intentionally modified molecular structure, so the very strong modification of the molecular structure is not just a change of the physical status of the ingredient, but it's really something that is impacting on its intrinsic molecular composition, food consisting isolated or produced from microorganisms, fungi, algae, material of mineral origin, or plants. This point 4 of the definition is one, in my opinion, of the most complex, because you see that food consisting of, isolated from, or produced from plants or their parts, except if there is a history of safe use in the Union, can be considered novel. And it has to be taken into account also how these plants are obtained, if via traditional propagating practices or non-traditional propagating practices. But also in this case, you see that if those practices are not giving rise to significant changes in the composition or structure of the food might still be classified as novel. Very, very complex definition. Let's make an example. If I extract something from a fruit or a vegetable, which is well known and is obtained by traditional propagating practices, this new ingredient won't be automatically classified novel food. Okay. Very often there is a strict approach to the ingredient, say, okay, this is simply new, has never been used in Europe before 1997, so it's novel. It's not exactly like that. You can see on the market a lot of fibers, for instance, citrus fibers, okay? Usually you don't consume as such citrus fibers, but they are on the market, they are not novel, they are used, and I was involved in the discussion about this ingredient when it was marketed for the first time in the first place in Europe. It's obtained from citrus fruit that are consumed in Europe from a very long time. Also the peels of the citrus fruit from which these fibers is coming has been consumed in Europe from a very long time. In Italy, we consume also the peels candied or in several forms. And these plants are coming from traditional propagating practices. So, in my opinion, in this case, you might have a situation where you are not novel. We have also to remember that there is a Court of Justice case, very interesting, which states the following principle regarding the novel food definition. If you are obtaining something from a non-novel ingredient with not novel techniques, most probably the outcome of this process won't be novel. Okay, there is a Court of Justice case that stated that. And then moving on with the definition, we have more clear situation, cell-cultured meat, food resulting from a production process not used in Europe before 1997, and engineered nanomaterials. The so-called novel processing, the point 7, it's also very interesting because it's not easy sometimes to define is a certain production process is new or not. Because sometimes when you produce an ingredient, you just use all the techniques combined in a different way or in a different sequence to obtain something new. This is a novel process or not? At the end of the day, you are using the same old techniques used for decades or centuries, but just combined differently. This is enough to have a novel food or not? The answer here is usually it depends. Okay, you have to do a case-by-case analysis. There is not a straight yes or no answer here. It's more clear when you have an entirely new production process, you develop something very novel. But very often when we produce new ingredients, we have just a sequence of known processes. So this is another very debated point. Moving from the definition to the procedure, you have to keep in mind that you have two regulatory paths for the authorization. An ordinary procedure, which is very lengthy, by regulation might take 18 months, but in reality, you usually need 2 years, 2.5 years, more 3 years than 2, to be honest. So 30, 36 months as an average. You have an Article 14 procedure that is for the notification of a traditional food from a third country, and we come to that in a minute. And you have in Article 4 not a path for an authorization of a novel food, but a path to ask a preliminary consultation with a member state about the classification of your ingredients. So you can also ask a sort of preliminary opinion in case you are in doubt on your ingredient under the definition. Okay. On the ordinary procedure, we will have a slide with Nikolaas, so I won't bother you with all the details, but there is a process with the Commission, a very important step with EFSA, where all the scientific data are assessed. That might be time consuming, so on and so forth. I would like to highlight you the difference between those three paths at a higher level. Okay, the ordinary procedure and the procedure for the traditional food from a third country are authorization requests centralized. You ask this authorization to the Commission, which has the scientific opinion and assistance to EFSA, while the preliminary consultation is managed at member state level. So in a state where you want to market your food, you can go to the authority with a preliminary dossier, not so detailed as the final one for the authorization procedure, and ask their opinion about the novel food classification or not. This might be, this is a knife cutting on both edges for you, because if the member state will say your food is not novel, this will mean that you don't have to invest in a very costly dossier. You don't have to wait 3 years for an authorization. You can go to market and be pretty safe that the authorities would stick to that opinion, which is published on the website of the European Commission. But if they say that your food is novel, there's no other way than go for the application, okay? And if you are already on the market, of course, stop marketing your food because you are doing something very dangerous. What is a traditional food from a third country is food that has been consumed at least 25 years in another country, in Asia, in South America, in Africa. Okay, is usually food different from what we are used to have in our plate, but that has a long history of safe consumption that can be demonstrated in another country via bibliography, books, articles, documents, whatever. It is true that this procedure is quicker and easier than the one ordinary under Article 10. The answer is so and so, yes, but with limitation, because technically it is shorter and easier. You have less burdensome obligation building the dossier, and you can skip certain phases. But we have to remember that this application is mainly possible just when you have product from primary production or process, but with a, let's say, a light level of processing, so directly connected to primary production. So for instance, in the approved ones, we have not sorghum, the cereal, but sorghum syrup, okay? So products very near to the primary production. Cell-cultured meat, let's say, or food that is synthetic can never go under this route, even if we can imagine, it's not true, but we imagine a history of safe consumption somewhere, okay? It's for primary production. And then you have also to remember that the scientific evaluation by EFSA can be theoretically skipped, but usually it is not, because the Commission always asks technical advice and support to the European Food Safety Authority. So if you read the regulation, it might look much better to go under this route, but be aware that usually the scientific assessment is done as well. Last slide, very important, confidentiality and data protection. You have to be aware that when you submit an authorization, now you have certain transparency obligations to notify also the studies that you are submitting and so on, but you can ask that certain information are kept confidential, okay? You have to justify that, but certain info can be, let's say, hidden from your competitors. When there is also in this case a reason, and for instance, you have to protect newly developed scientific evidence of data, you can also ask under Article 26 that after you get an authorization as a novel food under the ordinary procedure, Article 10, you get a period of 5 years of exclusivity when you can be the only one benefiting from the authorization of a new novel food. Because if you don't ask for this protection, everybody that can develop an ingredient with your specification will be able to market a novel food as you. So everybody can benefit from a new novel food application unless you ask this data protection clause and you get these 5 years of protection of your investment. So remember that if you have something really innovative and you want to protect, you have to ask that, absolutely, because otherwise anyone can copy-paste your application. So these are the most interesting and sometimes painful points. I'll close my screen and I leave to now Nikolaas for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Cesare, for your presentation. Now, Nikolaas Tilkin-Franssens, a regulatory affairs specialist at Pen Tec Consulting Group, will focus in detail on the future prospect of specific novel foods and the challenges in submitting like a novel food dossier to the European Union. Feel free to put your question in the chat while you're listening, or you will have a chance to ask your question later at the end of the Nikolaas speech. So welcome, Nikolaas, and I will leave you the floor. We cannot hear you, Nikolaas. Maybe you are muted. No, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, amazing.
Oh, perfect. Okay, happy that solved quickly. Yeah, I just want to say thank you. Well, I'm just grateful to be here today and to connect with all these professionals working with the foods of tomorrow, and see that so many people are interested as well to hear more, and that we can share our experiences also as part of the EIT community. And I will need some technical help to move through the slides. So I'll say next to my dear help. So we can already switch to the next one. And what I want to start with just is a bit showing as well that we are really at a momentum. We really see that there's a lot of attention going to the alternative proteins. And sometimes we also hear about the struggle that people mention to get alternative proteins when they are considered novel foods on the European market. But I just want to start with these positive notes by showing some examples which in the last year have been approvals for alternative proteins. And I think we should also be leveraging these ones and learn from the experience and see the opportunities which there are. And as Cesare already mentioned, cell cultured products are considered novel foods, and it's probably still the most challenging one. But even there, I also see opportunities, as I will mention throughout the following slides as well. Another main point which I want to make as a general for companies which are developing any of these types of products is to make sure to define your regulatory strategy well advanced in time, and to have a very good awareness of what is the safety data that you require, what might the cost be, what are the potential timelines, but at the same time as well to always keep flexibility, because we are really operating in a sphere which is modern, it's innovative, so the conditions are updated constantly. So which means that even when you have the dossier ready for submission, there might still be additional data requirements. So if we move to the next slide as well, I just provide a quick overview of how the entire application process looks. And it already starts from the R&D, from the research and development moments, where you really would have to take into account all the elements that are necessary. And which I really like to show about this overview is that it's just that the points 1 up until 7 is all about preparation of your dossier. So a lot of work goes into preparation, while in many cases, people speak a lot about the evaluation, the consideration maybe at commission level. But as an applicant, you really have to think through how to prepare your dossier. And as Cesare already mentioned as well, an application itself, so from the point that you can submit your dossier, we are looking at 1.5 years when we're very optimistic, up to 3 years as an average. And now with the transparency regulation, we actually believe that it might be even longer. So yeah, for the next slide as well, there I just give a brief overview of how does a safety dossier look. And so these are all the aspects which you as an applicant of a novel food dossier will have to address to show to the European Food Safety Authority, and so EFSA in short, that your food is safe for consumption and also nutritionally suitable. I cannot go into all the details because obviously, depending on your type of products, the information which you need to include will be quite different. But it really depends. So just to give one example, for plant proteins, there are some optimistic signs that no specific toxicological studies are required when there is specific data on the safety of your plant. So a good example was mung bean protein last year. They have not done any specific toxicological studies, which is actually a huge saving in costs and time for the preparation of your dossier. So moving to the next one as well. So where do you start to add all these data to your safety dossier? Your main references are obviously going to be the EFSA guidances. And on the one hand, we have the guidances which are specific to novel foods. The main one to build your dossier is the more technical one on the preparation and submission of an application for the authorization of a novel food. And secondly, there's the administrative guidance, which has received a lot of attention past year. So that's why it's been recently updated with the application of the transparency regulation. And then on the other hand, again, depending really on the type of product you may have, you have to look at a whole body of different EFSA guidances, which may be applicable. And just to mention two here, there is a specific one now on nanoparticles, which all regulated types of foods, including even animal feeds, now have to address in their technical dossiers. And this puts extra work on us, but also finding the right laboratories, making sure your studies are in line with the EFSA requirements is quite an additional work. And then as said, depending on your product, there may be very specific guidances which you will have to look into. So especially, let's say, in the case of fermentation, precision fermentation products, you will have to look on the guidances which are specifically applicable to microorganisms when used as production organisms. And in this case, I'm mentioning the whole genome sequence analysis, which EFSA requires, and also the outcome to be reported in very specific ways. Next slide, please. So yeah, taking these starting points, all the entire body of EFSA guidance, which is available as a starting point, your dossier and how successful your dossier will be will really depend on how well you took into account the requirements which are available already by EFSA, but also every reference that we can find already in existing applications or by other methods by which EFSA gave indications on the data requirements. So, but just to mention that there will never be an exhaustive list of requirements. And that's what I mentioned earlier. We need to have this flexibility when we are presenting our dossiers. What happens specifically for cell cultured products? So far, there has been no submission yet. So EFSA also doesn't have the experience yet. And precision fermentation, also the guidance is still quite limited. So meaning that for those types of products, the application, preparing your dossier can be slightly more challenging. And we are learning on the way. And sometimes as producers, this is an opportunity you also need to take to educate the risk assessors, and so the EFSA panels on your products. And in that way, hoping by sharing the right information, by being transparent, actually hoping to avoid additional information requests once your application has been submitted. An important one also to always look out for are the EFSA updates. They organize plenty of webinars where they share details about data requirements. And often the floor is also given to stakeholders to ask very specific questions. And you can learn from other people who are also dealing with the same issues or open questions. And then lastly, for cultured meats, I think it's a good example, as we have very little experience in Europe. You can obviously look at Singapore, which has quite detailed guidance, which is really helpful for both cultured meats and precision fermentation products. And recently in November, there has been taking the first steps with a positive evaluation of the FDA for cell cultured poultry. So it's also an interesting reference to look at to start building dossiers for European Union purposes. So moving to the next slide. One we have to mention is the transparency regulation, which has now fully entered into force. Since 27th of March, all the dossiers are in principle public, and you can only request confidentiality for certain elements of your dossier on a limited number of grounds. This brings about a lot of changes in presenting your dossier. The tools on how you have to submit your dossiers have all been updated. And also the ways on how to redact information in your dossier has had a lot of has had a lot of impact in the last year, and which is now more formalized into a number of guidance documents, which for any applicant, they need to at least have the awareness. And for people really preparing the dossiers, it created a lot of extra work. Also prior, which is something very important if you do not have much knowledge about transparency regulation yet. So prior to submitting your dossier, all of the studies, they have to be notified with EFSA. So all the studies which support the safety of your novel foods, because if it's not done properly or not in time, you risk to have a 6-month penalty, meaning that you have a 6-month extra delay in the evaluation of your novel foods. And lastly, but that's a positive one, is that you can also now reach out to EFSA prior to your application to ask questions. So next slide, please. So just a little bit on the expectations for 2023. I think it's not mentioned here, but hopefully more approvals still for alternative proteins. We are hopeful that it will happen as well. And in that sense as well, EFSA is going to, or is at least looking to update the technical guidance on the preparation and submission of novel food applications. We also have some indications that they're really helping potential applicants to look into what are actually the compositional requirements that you would have to look into for your novel foods, and which also helps to set the appropriate specification limits for your final novel foods. Another one which we are really welcoming is that EFSA is looking into the risk assessment for cell cultured products. So in May, there will be an EFSA colloquium on this topic, and this will really help to understand how EFSA might be looking at cell cultured products. And lastly, linked to the transparency regulation, we have seen a lot of updates to all the more administrative parts of EFSA guidances, and as well the indications given by the European Commission, who handles the confidentiality requests. And one thing we are really hoping for actually is to understand better what are the potential justifications for when a notification of a study was not done in time or was not done properly, if you made a mistake, which at the moment is still vague. So sometimes it creates a bit of uncertainty. When will this 6-month penalty be put in place or not? So if we can go to the next slide, please. So then some general watch outs is just depending on your type of product, really go into deep and consider which are the risks that you may have for your type of protein or novel food in general. To mention, for instance, with plant proteins, when you are concentrating the protein out of a plant, you might also be concentrating some of the undesired substances. Something to be really well aware of early in the process to avoid surprises when collecting the data. Another one, which is still a real complication for dossiers in the European Union, is that we do not have an integrated risk assessment at the moment. And so this is already from the legal part. If you have certain enzymes or you have genetic modification in your process, this might mean that you have different, that you would require, different authorization procedures, and also different risk evaluations by different EFSA panels. And this is still a high complexity, which we don't see, for instance, in Singapore and the US, where the entire process of, let's say, cell cultured meats is all addressed in one application. Another one which is really important and is linking back to all these EFSA guidances that we have is to make sure that if you comment any studies with external laboratories, you need to make sure that they are compliant with the specifics that EFSA requires and the way that EFSA requires you to produce the outputs. Because if certain details are not in order, it can make that you have to redo the studies, which obviously will have a huge impact on the timeline for evaluation, and costs for some studies, especially toxicological studies, can be really expensive. Then a note I already made before, the transparency regulation. So we have a lot more obligations now before and during the presentation of your novel food application. So the question there will be, what will be the impact? Also this 6-month delay. Will the timelines for novel foods increase? Or can we, thanks to the recent approvals, become more efficient? And another one, just also transparency regulation, but we cannot repeat enough for awareness, is to make sure to always notify your studies in time and to do it properly. So it's all about proper organization. To go to the last slide, I think already. Yeah, so that's it. So as I said, it's positive. We see some approvals, and I just generally to everyone in this field, I just want to wish you best luck in what you're working on. Connect to each other. So also, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And we also have on our website, we have a Pen Tec Academy website where you can find a report which helps you a little bit to get more awareness and knowledge about how novel food dossiers work in generally, and which dig a little bit deeper on the different categories.
Thank you very much, Nikolaas, for all of your presentation. It could be like great to do an event at the end of this year to understand like how we're like our prospect in 1 year. So everybody now is very welcome to ask questions or like to write in the chat. We are like a lot today, so I'm expecting that everybody have questions. So please feel free to jump in. Yeah, maybe we have 2 people that were like highlighting their video. So please.
Yeah. Ilaria, if not, I have one for Nikolaas, maybe just to start the discussion a bit, if he has experience.
Sure.
Because indeed, I have an example of a very big company that started a study in US without the European headquarters, even though that the study was not pre-submitted. I have no experience on this, but do you think that the 6-month delay will be automatic, or it's discretional and maybe certain justification can be accepted? Because it was literally like that, you know, I start the trial in the US, I don't tell to the headquarters in Europe, then they have to start the notification, the authorization process, and of course are late because.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, which we see quite often. And so either they used it for purposes in other regions, or it can be that you have certain studies which were done in the past before you even thought about going to your submission. And in those cases, there is in the guidance documents by EFSA, it states that the notification of studies should happen from the moment you consider your novel foods, that your novel foods to be commercialized in the European Union, and that you will go for a submission of a novel food. But obviously, this is this sentence is very open to interpretation, and at the moment, that's why I mentioned in my presentation, we're really waiting to get a bit more clarity. When are we going to get the 6-month penalty? When are we not?
Thank you. But it was great to have your perspective, to move the perspective on the novel food. You know, the moment when you realize you have novel food. Yeah.
Great. So we have one question from Henrietta asking for the Article 4 process. Once a member state has confirmed the non-novel status of an ingredient, will it apply EU-wide?
It should be like that, honestly, because the other member state might have the possibility to interact. If they don't, I would say that they cannot challenge after the decision. Usually the member states are very cautious in releasing not novel food assessment, but there are many if you check the website. So, you know, if you look at Article 4, it states that in order to determine if a food falls or not within the scope of the novel food regulation, member states may consult other member states and the Commission. So they may, but they may not. That's the big question. And it's happening all the time. We don't have full transparency on that, honestly, if you really check the website and the summary of the application. But in my opinion, if this decision of a member state are not challenged within a reasonable time frame, they will consolidate and it will be very hard for, I don't know, Italy to challenge an assessment did in France or vice versa. But it's true they're not did by the Commission, so it's a bit of not an unclear point, but point where that can be debated. Until now, Nikolaas, I have no knowledge of situation where these assessments were challenged, honestly. I don't know if you have, but.
We have another question from Valeria. Can Nico explain how pre-submission ED question works? Does confidentiality apply if the question contains confidential data? In principle, pre-submission ID questions are said to be made public?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question as well.
Yeah.
So indeed, quickly on how it works. So now there's a new tool which is called the EFSA Connect portal, where you have, so either that's the place where you notify studies for novel foods, and you indeed also have the opportunity for pre-submission questions. In my understanding, so far, we have not seen any pre-submission questions being published. So if it would happen, I believe it will be once you submit your dossier. But it's also then at point of submission, I believe that will be the moment when you will have to request confidentiality with the European Commission, because in the EFSA Connect portal, the European Commission is not included at principle.
I hope that for Valeria is clear. If you have any other question, you can join in the call. Then we have Justin is asking, if we identify our ingredient as novel, but our manufacturing process novel as well, how should we have to proceed? Do we have to submit two separate dossiers or all in one dossier is acceptable?
I would say that one is acceptable.
Yeah, indeed. It happens sometimes that you have a novel foods. And so Cesare explains the different categories you have for novel foods. We had dossiers already where you actually fall under two different categories. So ultimately, you will be considered one novel food.
And if I can add, Nico, that's very important. If you apply for a novel food authorization for an ingredient, but this ingredient might have a lot of different uses, or this ingredient might be produced in 2 or 3 different forms, you can do a single dossier, but you have to consider all these variables in the application, because otherwise, at the end of the day, you will use, I don't know, your ingredient in yogurt, because you request the application for yogurt, you demonstrate the safety on yogurt, but not on other food categories. So you have to be very careful there, because the dossier might be also complex from this perspective. It's not just, I approve the ingredient, you can do whatever you like in any food category. So
yeah, no, correct. So the painful part is you'll have to comply with all the data requirements for the 2 categories.
yeah.
Ilaria, you're on.
Sorry, we have another question from Henrietta asking, can a member state decide an ingredient is novel from market surveillance where proof of substantial use processing method beyond 1997 is unavailable, or is it only done through the legal framework, for example, Article 4 or 10?
If I understand the question, it's can a member state decide that the ingredient is novel because the lack of this proof of marketing before 1997 is missing? Yes, they can. I don't know if I get the question right. Okay, let's assume that your ingredient is not mapped in the novel food regulatory landscape. Okay, you have no dossier pending, you have no authorization, you have no preliminary opinion from a member state. So nobody's telling if it's novel or not. Okay, Article 4, Article 10. it's up to you as a manufacturer. You can manufacture something in Europe if you think that there is a proof of consumption before 1997, but you know, these proofs sometimes are not easy to be found. So you have to be ready to answer to any challenge from authorities, because they might think that something is innovative and you have the proof that it is not. You know, food tradition is very different from Italy to Sweden to Romania or to Spain. So maybe a competent authority in Italy might think that something is new, and you have a proof that is consumed from 25 years, 30 years in, I don't know, Lithuania. It might be. I get the question, but you have to be ready to answer and challenge the authorities and have the proof and the dossier in-house, let's say.
Okay, it's Henrietta here. Thanks for the answer. So if that authority then decides it's still novel, even after you've been selling it somewhere else, what would happen in that case where, you know, basically two markets are slightly different?
In each state, the legal remedies are different, but you have legal instruments to challenge that decision. And in my opinion, if you think really you are right, you have the proof, it's painful, but it's less costly and quicker than do an authorization as novel food. Even because if you do a dossier from scratch, you need 3-4 years, you will basically give reason to this authority. You have to stop marketing if you have knowledge that you're selling a non-authorized novel. So I will challenge the authority.
Okay.
You have to stop, you know, you stop the problem there and try to move on. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, just a follow-on question on that. So I know the EU novel food catalog hasn't got legal status as such. So if something in the catalog says it's not a novel food, but you know, one country decides they want to look into it further, they say something specific about your product, is there any sort of legal standing in that case? You know, can you challenge it in such an instance where it is in the catalog?
It's still very persuasive, the catalog. For instance, I never had an issue with cannabis part plants which are in the catalog. We have issues with CBDs reasonably, and we had even before they added the CBDs as novel food in the catalog. So no, it's a very strong evidence for you, the presence in the catalog. Okay, also the guidance from the European Commission, guidance documents are not binding, but still are the highest level of interpretative documents that you might find. So, I don't know, Nico, if you have something, but as a lawyer, okay, yes, it's true what Henrietta said, but
No, I agree. Like, it's only added to the novel food catalog if there is really evidence from a or several member states that it has been consumed prior to 1997. So obviously you always have to make sure that production or process has no impact on the food as such. So you still have to do a bit of homework, but it's a very strong reference.
Yeah, in terms of the novel food and catalog entry, it's quite general. It doesn't talk about the, you know, the part of the, for example, it doesn't talk about the part of the plant or how it's processed or anything. It's just general saying this plant is okay. So in such an instance, would you still have some sort of legal standing, or you'd have to really prove your own product itself?
it depends.
Yeah, it's really a case-by-case assessment. We often have this discussion on plant proteins, which level of protein concentration makes that it's a novel food. It's tough, yeah. So but it's a case-by-case assessment.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Henrietta, for asking questions. We hope that we solve your issues. And I think we have one of the last question from Antonio from Microbiome. So if I did not misunderstood in the definition of novel food, point 2, Any food derived from microorganisms is considered a novel food. Can you explain more about this? Does it apply only to new species? However, even a new classified species might have been consumed for centuries. We just did not know about their existence. We saw you, Antonio. If you would like also to join our call, feel free to open your microphone.
I was just surprised for this because I mean there are many examples of all the fermented foods are made are derived from microbes somehow. So I was not clear if this is related with the history of this microorganism, or any microorganism will be considered a novel food.
It's not every micro, so the definition consists of two parts, and your question is related to the second part on the categories of novel foods. But before entering the second part on the categories, the first criteria applies. Was there consumption before 15th of May 1997? So for most standard fermentation products, you will find the evidence, and then it's not considered a novel food.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And again, there are like cases, I guess, where this will be confusing because most of the microbial species, we still don't know about them. So it's difficult to say when was the beginning of using that species in a fermented product, especially the spontaneous fermentation like sourdough. We still don't know how many species can make sourdough and when this started.
Mm-hmm.
No, I see your point, Antonio, but it's you have to focus, in my opinion, on the history of safe use. Okay, we know that microorganisms might be there for centuries, millennia, but if we don't have any evidence, probably a safety assessment will be requested because we don't know that microorganism, or we don't know that specific use, you know, as a regular food or ingredient on the market. So. But not all microorganisms considered novel food.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks to you, Cesare and Antonio. Nicolas, we have like the last question from Henrietta. Do general scientific papers count as evidence to prove non-novel status, or does it need to be evidence for your specific product and process?
It can. The only issue is that often scientific papers, they discuss properties, they might say something about production processes. And if we look at the history of use, what the commission or a member state really wants to see is consumption data. So it can help as supporting, but it will not be sufficient in most cases.
Yeah, I agree, Nico. History of safe consumption is not just a one-time consumption. Is a regular consumption, and this usually, for me, it's the most difficult data to provide, to produce, even more difficult than the technical data. If you have the budget, you can do studies. Scientific data are not a problem, you get there. Sometimes retrieve this data is complex.
Great. Henrietta, thanks you. We have a question from Jennifer that is, she's saying, thank you for interesting presentations. Is there a minimum dose under which a food ingredient is considered a novel food? Cesare is saying no.
No, it's not linked to a dose, but to a novelty.
No,
okay.
I agree. It's also a bit of a case by case element. Like maybe in some cases where the dose could really change the way how a food is consumed. I think maybe with the barrier between food supplements and normal foods. But it really depends on what product we're asking for.
Okay, great. If anybody else has question, I remember you that you can reach the speakers through the community. So subscribing to the community and use like Hive as a platform, or you have like the contact of the email address of the speakers. So feel free to contact them. I think that we can move on to the networking session. So for those who prefer, also can leave the link of their LinkedIn profile to like in the chat room, or like, and the others can join the breakout rooms. This will be like randomly composed groups of like 6 people. You are not obliged to join the event. For those who wish can also like end here, and like I hope that you enjoy the event. So we will leave you like you don't have to like worry about the timing, because we will leave the breakout rooms open, so you like stay in the breakout room to network as much as you wish. And for the others that are not gonna join the breakout rooms, I really thank you for everyone for like joining us. And I hope that we see you soon at the next expert to expert talk next month. So thank you, Cesare, thank you, Nikolaas and Asie, for joining the event, and like let's split in the breakout rooms.
Thank you, Ilaria.
Thank you.
Thank you.